And we're
We're
live.
on. We're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our first event as Arizona stays on regular time and the whole world shifts to daylight. So if you're confused, so are we. But it's actually 1 o'clock here and 4 o'clock where Deanna is and 1 o'clock where Jane Ann is. So yay. We're assembled here to talk about a grave robbery, another Stoker, and what's that woman's name? Veronica Speedwell. Victorian Adventure. I love the cover. I dressed to match in case you can kind of see.
You did. That's fabulous.
I love it. Right. I'm so fond of this series. In fact, we've been fond of all Deanna's writing. And in case I freeze out, which is apparently a potential problem, I want you to be sure, Jane Ann, to ask her about what she's working on now, which is, I know, another Speedwell, but then a continuation of a different project, which I think will be great news for everybody. So our co-host today and probable full-time host of I Freeze is the wonderful Jane Ann Krentz, who kind of lives on our Zoom. We keep hoping we'll get her back to the store. But anyway, and Jane Ann will be joining us in May. Is it May 2nd?
First, that first Tuesday. I think it's the 7th. 5th. I don't ask. I don't know.
Well,
Early
whatever.
Tuesday.
Early in May.
Early Tuesday.
Early in May, Jane Ann will have a new book, and I believe it's a Jane Castle book this time.
That's
And
funny.
we will be talking to John Charles of our staff, who I have to say, since he retired from the Scottsdale Public Library, has become an absolute force of nature and is running his entire parallel events program at the Poison Pen, which I love because the library never let him do anything. It's really been, it's been wonderful. But anyway, here we are talking about a grave robbery. And I want to know if Deanna actually practiced lying in a coffin to write this book.
I did not. And it's one of the few things I haven't done. Like a lot of times when I talk about specific cocktails or I wrote one book where the heroine was flying like a really early biplane. I went and found a model of it and climbed all over this plane. And yeah, I've done a couple of things. I raised butterflies. So I would have that experience, but no, I did not lie in a coffin. And now I'm feeling like maybe I need to go find one.
No kidding. I thought she'd be haunting a cemetery, taking the lid off a sarcophagus, stretching out to see how it all go.
No,
Determined from this that Veronica actually does do that.
I wouldn't be surprised. Nothing the girl does shocks me. But I did, the book actually has its genesis about 25 years ago when I was in London and I was in Madame Tussauds. And they have this beautiful figure there that they label Sleeping Beauty. And she's 18th century French and just stunningly gorgeous and so elegant. And she's lying out on this beautifully upholstered chaise lounge. And her diaphragm moves up and down as you stand there watching her. And it's just the most mesmerizing thing because she's so beautiful and you almost expect her to open her eyes.
Wow. Well,
she's magical. So I just took a ton of notes and said, I don't know when, because this, of course, was well before I was ever published. So I thought, I don't know when, I don't know how, but someday I'm going to write a book that has its beginning with this moment, with this figure. And so that was the very little germ, the little seed that started a grave robbery.
In an age of virtual reality, it's really frightening to think what might actually be accomplished with stuff like this. Wow.
It's
terrifying. All I can say is, Deanna, you have been messing around with Gothic horror behind my back. And I love that.
It is. Everybody's saying it's the creepiest Veronica. And I'm like, that's fine. I leaned into the creepy hard with the unboxing video that I put up on Instagram because I used a Victorian maquette hand to kind of go and open the box. And yeah. So
is that what that was? I saw the video, but I didn't know what the hand thing was.
It was a maquette. We've had it for ages, and it's to help artists learn how to draw hands because of course it's notoriously the most difficult thing to do is to draw a hand. So we've had it hanging out on our bookcase in the living room for ages, and I was like, well, I don't want the same kind of unboxing video everybody does. Let's make it fun and creepy. So there we went.
An original box cutter of a frightening kind. Before I forget, we are down to only 6 copies remaining. Deanna signed, as she kindly does when she doesn't visit us, a big batch of A Grave Robbery, and magically they've almost all sold. So if you're watching this and you want one, this would be a time to speak up. It's possible that we could send her more, but a lot of this is going to depend on where the publisher is in terms of warehouse stock, because publishers are printing more closely to order than ever before. And I say that because, you know, wherever you shop, if you're really interested in a book, you really ought to pre-order it, because otherwise the odds are good. Almost any title that you might not get yours if you wait too long. So just mentioning it. All right, Jane Ann, I've said enough. Over to you.
Well, I want to talk about the Gothic aspects because I just love that. And I'm wondering what you think makes it work. Why are we so drawn to it over and over again? And why does it keep coming back around? But what do you think is the big appeal of the Gothic? Of the
Yeah, I
Gothic
mean,
elements, the horror elements.
Gothic as a genre has been around for ages. I mean, Jane Austen was a fan of the Gothic. She mocked it in Northanger Abbey, but I feel like you don't really mock something unless you also love it, which she clearly did. I think she enjoyed the outrageousness of it, because the early Gothics were clearly seriously outrageous. And a lot of people tried their hand at writing them. You know, Louisa May Alcott wrote a book called The Long Fatal Love Chase, which is a Gothic, and it's got all the elements that you love. You know, it's got heroines kind of being hounded to death, and I think the enduring appeal of the Gothic is it gives you a chance to experience this heightened atmosphere and to explore your fears in a really safe way. You know, no matter what happens, when all is said and done, you can close the book and you're fine. So you have experienced vicariously, you know, whatever that poor heroine is being tortured with, you've experienced it too, but you're safe, you're okay. So whatever it is, you know, you can, especially I think when there are horrors in the world that are difficult to process, it's nice sometimes to take a small horror and to experience that and to say, okay, you know, we've survived that. Maybe I can survive something a little bit bigger. I think that a lot of times people look to process trauma in ways that they practice it, you know, without actually facing it out in the world. Sometimes I think it's a safe space to sit there. I've known people who can read just absolutely incredibly graphic and terrifying horror, which I can't do, but they're doing it because that's processing something for them, and it gives them a way to engage with the world in a safe place, because there's no place safer than between the covers of a book.
Well, I also like the fact that Gothic, especially combined with horror, which is traditionally what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to have both elements. I like the intimacy of the danger. I think
It's
that,
very personal.
yeah, it's not us against that gang or that army or those bad guys from outer space or something. It's in the house. It's right there. And
Oh my gosh, it's the mad woman in your attic. It's the you know the gorgeous suitor who you've married, who it turns out is trying to kill you for your inheritance. It's the uncle who's supposed to be your guardian, who's decided he wants you out of the way. You know, it's very intimate. It's I actually wrote one novel prior to this, which kind of falls into the Gothic category. And I don't know about you, but in the 80s, I was reading Victoria Holt. I absolutely loved her early Gothics. Some of the later ones don't reread as well as the earlier ones, but I loved the ones set in Cornwall. And, you know, she played a lot with the Gothic elements. And so a lot of, especially when you're talking about Gothic romance, a lot of the question boils down to, is he a good man or is he a bad man?
Right.
And so I wrote a book called The Dead Travel Fast, where my question was, is he a human man? Because I wanted people to wonder, is this guy a vampire? Maybe. So it was set in Transylvania, and it's set in the 1860s, and the heroine, you know, heads off on her travels, as you do, and encounters this gorgeous aristocrat who just may or may not be sucking people's blood. And because that was my love letter, my homage to the Gothic, because I think if you've grown up loving those novels, at some point all of us have a Gothic in us, I feel like.
9 coaches waiting. Oh Lord.
Oh,
Parade
love,
Magazine did a sweep of I'm trying to remember whether it was 100 romance or 100 historic, whatever it was. Anyway, for some reason I actually wound up nominating or being in the finalists with 2, one of which was Catherine, which is one of my all-time favorite Anya Seton books, which is
mhm.
not really a Gothic, but the other was 9 Coaches Waiting, which, you know,
Mary Stewart was just, and the thing that I learned as a writer from Mary Stewart is there was one book in particular, and I want to say it was Madame Will You Talk, where for maybe 60 pages, literally nothing happens, but it's terrifying. Like, because she has the heroine pursued, and
right.
yet nothing actually happens. There's no action taking place, but it's what you think might be happening. It's what the heroine thinks might be happening. And it's such a gift to be able to write a scene at which you really don't have much plot, but you have so much internal monologue, so much internal development, so much conflict going on in here, and it's engaging to the reader, and the heart's pounding a little faster, and you kind of are a little bit worried because you should have turned on an extra light and you didn't, and now it's getting dark, and you don't want to get up and go turn on that light because it's too close to the curtains. He's
Reading
behind
is
the
just
curtain.
Sorry, back
reading
in
is
1995, when P.D. James was the only time she ever came to the Poison Pen, which was broke my heart, but nevertheless, she did come. And somebody asked her why she wrote such dark, because she did, I love the way the British call her a cozy writer, where it's just their definition is different. But anyway, she said that what greater pleasure would there be than to lie safely in your bed, snugly and safely in your bed at night, and know that the footstep on the stair is not coming for you. I've always loved that. I mean, and you're right. It's
Perfection.
exactly what you said, that, you can be in a safe place between the covers of a book or in the covers of your bed and scare yourself silly.
Mhm. Exactly. Exactly. And I am easily scared. So I don't need to go much further than a nice Gothic, and I'm good to go. I don't have to push that very far. But I mean, even Barbara Michaels wrote some wonderful Gothics in the 70s and 80s, really before or at the beginning of when she was doing the Amelia Peabody series, that I have absolutely loved. And again, in several of those books, not a ton actually happens. If you were to summarize the plot in bullet points, you'd have maybe 5. But it's so much about setting atmosphere. And I think that's one of the things that Gothic does extremely well, extraordinarily well, is the sense of atmosphere. That is usually unparalleled in most Gothics.
it's a genre that really depends on atmosphere to pull it off,
Mhm.
because without the right atmosphere, you can't do that over the top feeling, that suspending disbelief, because that's where you have to go with a good Gothic, is wondering if the heroine really is going mad.
Yeah, and it's trickier to do a Gothic in a place like Boca Raton. I mean, you can absolutely do it, but it's trickier. It's a little bit easier if you've got, a Cornish mansion on an island off the coast with the gloomy fogs, or you can do it in the Pacific Northwest, Jane. You've got perfect Gothic weather. It's harder
Isolation.
for Barbara and Phoenix.
You
It's
need
It is
the
hard.
isolation, that sense of isolation, and
If
can't.
you're all really interested in this topic, Jane Ann and JT Ellison and I did a trio of Zoom events during COVID in which we thoroughly explored this whole subject. And it was partly because we could see that that genre fiction rolls around in waves in publishing. And you mentioned, I think, Deanna, a key point, which is as the world changes around us, what we want to read also changes. So in terrible times, the Gothic has more of an appeal. So does historical fiction, because we know how it comes out, where we don't know where we're going at the moment. But
Absolutely.
anyway, Jane Ann and JT and I really discussed this, and I'll try to look up the URLs for that. We're in the process of trying to index the gazillion events that we've done, and it would be fun to put those together as a trio that people can watch. But
What I
anyway,
remember, what I remember is you, Barbara, because you have such a sweep of the whole marketplace, and how you started identifying Gothics going into all the other subgenres. You even found them in science fiction.
Ooh.
Remember
And
this?
now we have romantasy. I mean, another trend that's coming, and largely pushed by TikTok, because romantasy, a great deal of it is pulsing sex. And there's a PW today mentioned that there's a new little publishing company started inspired by, in fact, the demand from TikTok readers for more sex in their books. So, the publishing market is responding to the marketplace, right? But anyway, back to this. And, I love the fact that Stoker and Veronica have a really great sex life, but we don't have to actually I mean, it's not visually presented. I love that.
It's not. There's a lot left to the imagination, simply
Right.
because, I have been very, very fortunate that a lot of romance readers seem to enjoy my books, which I deeply appreciate, because I don't give them a proper romance. If you take the mystery out of my books, they are not full romances, because I don't give readers a happily ever after or a happily for now at the end of each book. The relationship kind of carries on and evolves throughout the entire series. And so it's not a complete romantic experience. But I want to give them enough to be engaged and to appreciate the relationship, and kind of, maybe create their own image in their mind of what's happening. Yes, I do take Stoker's shirt off in this book, and his pants too. So readers will be very happy about that. They love naked Stoker. But yeah, I've never been inclined to do something terribly.
Stoker, God, there's a phrase. Sorry, that's
Naked-
going to be
never-
my new meme for your books.
Do it.
Naked Stoker.
Naked Stoker. I know my readers. I know what they want. No, I think that because of the fact that sex and violence both, opposite ends of the spectrum, but very personal, intimate actions sometimes. And I think it's very interesting to let readers fill in the blanks for themselves, because they're going to bring their own experiences and their own values and their own fantasies and their own, whatever they want to see. They're going to bring that to the page if I'm setting up a love scene, but I don't spell it all out for them. In the same way that if I don't show them all of the gore necessarily that's happened, they're going to fill in the blanks. And if they happen to read a fair amount of horror or a fair amount of explicit violence in most of what they do, they're going to fill in certain blanks that maybe I would have never even thought of. And it's the same with romance readers. They may think of some things for Stoker and Veronica to get up to that wouldn't have occurred to me. So they have carte blanche to think what they like. They can go fill in those blanks however pleases them.
One of the things I loved about the book was just because it kind of fascinated me when I was doing my Amanda Quick books, was the whole thing about wax sculptures. And yes, they're interesting in a museum, but there was a time when I understand when I was doing the research, the time when the sculptors, the people who actually created them, thought there would be a booming industry in doing wax sculptures of people in the family, like grandpa died, so you had a wax sculpture made of him. And it turned out people really didn't want a wax sculpture of grandpa sitting in the living room.
That is horrifying.
But it was kind of a, the question then arises, is the sculpture too real? And when the dead are dead, they have to move to a more distant, they have to be put in a distance. Because it was the reality of the sculpture that's freaked people out. And yet this was the same crowd that was happy to take photographs of the dead and, the super mourning practices and all that. I just found that fascinating.
I think it's adding that third dimension that takes it from, kind of a safe place to remember someone to, well, that's freaky and that needs to be killed with fire. Don't put that in my living room.
Yeah.
Because it's terrifying. But that, it gets back to what I was saying about that Sleeping Beauty figure. she was so stunningly beautiful, but it was the animation that took it to the next level. It was the breathing, which I guess was almost a fourth dimension in that regard. Watching her lying there, even if she hadn't been breathing, there is a part of you that would have said, she gonna open her eyes sometime soon? Because I feel like she's gonna. But then you add the breathing to it. And I feel like every step you take towards something seeming animate, the more alarming it is when we know that it's not animate and it's not supposed to be.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I can absolutely see why those wax figures of people didn't take off. That's
It,
terrifying.
it didn't work.
That's
Yeah. Didn't sell. But it was just also an interesting comment, I think, on how imagination works.
Absolutely, because we really I think there's only so much that we're comfortable with. And Victorians were exactly like you said, they were so much more comfortable with death than we were. They were, your family member would die, they would stay in the bedroom until they were washed and prepared, and then maybe they would go lie out on the dining room table. They'd be in their coffin in the living room or in the dining room, and people they might stay under your roof for a couple of days, and you kind of walked hand in hand with death a lot of the time. And there's a wonderful Instagram account that I follow that's a Thanatos archive, and they publish a lot of Victorian death photography. And it's very graphic sometimes, some of the things that they would do and the ways that they coped with their mourning. And yet, in some respects, some of it seems a little healthier than what we do because we're so removed from it. So it's fascinating to see how different cultures and different time periods, process death, and what we're comfortable with, and where we feel like we need to draw the line and say that's not okay.
Well, tell me
I'm
about
not
the
cool with
anatomical Venuses, though. I've never heard
that.
of those.
So the anatomical Venus was a fascinating phenomenon. They were sculpted starting in the 17th century in Italian universities. That's where they began. And the idea was you would have a wax model, and they would have 7, 8, 9 layers deep of skin and tissue and organs and different systems. And they could be disassembled. And the purpose was anatomical study. So you could teach a student, so that you didn't have to cut up cadavers. You could teach a student, hey, this is what a circulatory system looks like. This is what the digestive system looks like. The interesting thing about the anatomical Venuses, though, is they were sculpted to be beautiful. They would put hair on them. They would put jewelry on them. Sometimes some of the positions that you see they were sculpted in look a little sexy. And you're like, that doesn't feel like it's okay. It just doesn't feel like it's okay. But they were very, very popular for quite a little while, and there was a boom for them, and a lot of universities across Europe started using them. And then a lot of these figures found their way into sideshows, carnival shows, traveling shows for entertainment purposes. And people would go in and they'd pay their little money, and they would see, the naked figure. And a lot of times they were used to illustrate pregnancy. And so there'd be a section where you would go and you would take off the rounded part of the outer belly, and you'd see the fetus curled up in there, and you could take that out. And it was a way of demonstrating what the kind of the mysteries of the human body were in a very, kind of open 3D, this is what it looks like sort of model. But there's this really interesting blurry line because of the fact that so many of them did look sexy, and there were some men who collected them, perhaps not strictly for medical purposes, maybe to go and just say, oh, look at my pretty girl, because you can, with these beautiful long tresses, you can kind of picture a couple of these dudes maybe using them for a slightly different purpose. That's very disturbing to think about, but
Not a blow-up doll.
I don't know.
Now we're in London in 1889.
89.
How you're taking this reasonably slowly, so you have lots of time you can cover. I love historical fiction, among all the other reasons, is that you don't have to advance it in real time because it's already happened, everybody's already dead, whatever. So I like the way you're moving slowly through this. And in this book also, you are primarily Well, you're in England, because some of your books, you're outranging the world, which I also love, but this one is rooted.
This is a London book.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, the one before this, A Sinister Revenge, was mostly set in a country house on the Jurassic Coast
Right.
in Devon. But this one, we're back in London for a little while, which is fun. I always like to kind of vary it up a little bit, and I love the London locations. They're great fun to play with. So yeah, it was a good time to get back there and make use of the settings that are real or the settings that I created.
Sure. Plus, you can bring more of the family into it.
Absolutely.
Stoker's relatives, local friends, whatever it all is. So, I love a series that moves, because I don't always want to be in Cabot's Cove. But as you say, every once in a while, it's really good to kind of reassemble the basic team in a place that we're all familiar with. So, how do you decide where it's going to be? Is it where the story takes you, or do you decide you want to write a London book and then think of, I know in this case you were inspired by the anatomical Venuses, or the woman in the coffin in London at Madame Tussauds. But did that then dictate that you were in London because that was what you wanted to write about?
It was one of those situations where it all just kind of dovetailed beautifully. I wanted to do a London book this time because I'd had them out at a country house the last time, but I also, because of the fact that I was using the anatomical Venuses, I was dealing with this collection that I've created that belongs to the Earl, that's at their workshops. I needed them to be in London, and so it all just worked beautifully together. And that's usually the way it goes. Is there'll be this beautiful kind of crossroads of what I need and what I want. And so it all just fits together, which is very nice.
I think it's interesting. In a sense, Veronica is your orphan in the story. She's the one without an immediate family, or at least a regular family. So I like the way you're bringing in Stoker's family and his screwy relationships with his relatives, and the Rossmoran clan. They're certainly taking on personalities too. I like the daughter, the one.
Oh, Lady Rose.
Who's
She's such a little menace. I mean, she's
I
the
like that.
worst. And Veronica doesn't like children. I got an email from a reader several months ago saying, I'm getting the impression from your books, you might not know that you're giving the impression you don't really like children. So here's how you should write them to show that you like children. And I'm like, no, you were right. You got it right the first time. I don't want this to be a series where, the children are wonderful and they take over everything. No, Veronica views them as a menace. They're always doing things, and she would, love nothing better than to keep them out of the collection. And, Lady Rose kind of always worms her way in. And I think a lot of Veronica's issues with Rose is that Rose is far too similar to Veronica. And of course, Rose has the world's biggest crush on Stoker, and kind of views Veronica as ultimately competition down the road. I think Rose would poison her teapot, given half the chance. But she was a wonderful catalyst for the plot in this one. So we're never going to see the Rosemoran children on screen for huge amounts of time, but from time to time, a little tidbit from one or the other is kind of useful. Plus, I had to work the monkey in somehow, and she was useful for the monkey, because I felt like 9 books in, it's time we had a monkey. We need a monkey. So we got a monkey.
You really developed a little community there. I think that's what people like returning to in a series. Not just the main characters, but that sense of, I know these people, or I know something. I'm at home here. This is a familiar territory to me. There's something about the key to a series is developing that community.
Absolutely. And in book 1, In a Curious Beginning, that's when Veronica loses her last link with her past, when the aunts who've raised her, one of them has been dead for a couple of years, but the other one passes away right at the beginning. And so Veronica severs her ties with the life she's known, and she has to kind of make her own way, and she has to create a found family. I love writing found families. I think it's just such a fun way to bring in characters and to show how connections build and how community is developed. And in Veronica's case, you know, she has JJ Butterworth, who's this intrepid female reporter who, again, is a little bit in competition with Veronica, but also Veronica is learning how to have female friends, maybe for the first time in her life. And we've got Morna Day, the police officer, who, bless him, is always having struggles of his own. And you know, we may potentially have picked up another new waif in the course of this book who might make an appearance again in future books. So yeah, I love. There's always either an animal or a human being who seems to join the crew through every book. And if it's not somebody becoming a member of the found family, then it's someone who is a member of Stoker's actual family.
Yeah.
Which those were not bonds he was really exploring when the first book opens. You know, he'd kind of cut off that part of his life, but Veronica doesn't really say no to too many people and too many experiences. So she's friends with his brothers. So Stoker's kind of been forced to come along for the ride and say, fine, I'll spend time with Tiberius. I may kick the crap out of him once in a while, but I'll spend time with him. So sometimes they come to blows, you know.
What do you think? What do you think from a writer's point of view is your long-term, when you look back over the 9 books, 9, did you say 9?
9.
Yeah. When you look back over that and you look at how your own writing evolved in terms of plotting and planning and figuring out where you're going to go next, how has the process changed from that first book or 2 that you wrote where you knew for sure where you were going, and then all of a sudden the books catch fire and now you're stuck with a series and you're
stuck.
No. But
in a
you know
most
what,
delightful way.
to really answer that, you ought to go back and talk about Lady Julia Gray, because you know
Yeah.
the first series where I fell in love with your books and your writing, and then you know various publishing sorts of things intervened. But I've always felt that Veronica was as an extension, you know, a growth.
I think she's absolutely a successor to that project. You know, we took a break because the Lady Julia series was a Victorian series. It was 5 books and 4 novellas. It blows my mind that I've been with Veronica twice as long now as I was with Julia. But there was a break in between them where I wrote some books that were set in a different time period, and so there was this gap. You know, when I wrote the first Julia book, which was Silent in the Grave, I think the first draft was something like 120,000 words. And I overwrote and then had to slice and dice. And now I underwrite, and I tend to turn in about 85,000 words to my editor and say, okay, where do we need to expand? What do we need to, you know, where do we need to grow? What do we need to see more of? So I'm a lot more efficient than I used to be. And one of the things that I've learned really, and it's taken me so long to learn this, is that little voice in the back of your head that says, you realize you're just waving your hands around and you haven't actually worked this plot point out. You know, there's a tendency when you're a writer to go, oh, it's probably fine, and just keep going. I'm finally learning to go back and fix that the minute the little voice says, girl, no, this isn't, you haven't explained this. I am much more willing to kill my darlings. I just turned in a manuscript 2-3 weeks ago, and there was a section. I woke up one morning. I was in love with a scene that I had written, so happy with it, and it was probably, I don't even know how long it was. I woke up the next morning, and then I thought, oh, that section and the section before it absolutely don't work. And it was 2 weeks before the book was due, and I cut 7,000 words and said, no, they don't work. And I just sliced them and went and just nailed my little feet to the floor and my butt to the chair and blasted through that same amount plus more to replace what I, you know, kind of exorcised from the manuscript. And it was a much better book. And I still love those scenes. but they did not work as well as what I put in. So, the willingness to say, I'm not going to be sentimental about this and I'm not going to be stubborn about it. I'm going to do what serves the book best, not what makes me say, oh, that's a pretty piece of writing, or, oh, I feel clever, or, oh, I want to put this in here. You can't let the sentiment or the ego or the pretty phrase, you can't let that lead the way. You have to go with what serves the story. And oh God, that's the hardest thing to do.
What
It's the
about
hardest thing to do.
what about the actual plot process though? Do you use a storyboard, or because
Oh no, I'm not that organized.
this is an intricate plot. This is a detailed, intricate plot. It reads beautifully, but at the end, you're going to be surprised because you did a great job of weaving in the secrets without revealing the secrets. So, was there a storyboard?
No, what there was me turning that book into my editor and emailing her the next day saying, can I have it back because I want to change the murderer? And she, to her credit, said, yes, have it back, get it to me in 2 weeks. And I rewrote the last half of the book and changed who the murderer was.
Wow. Okay.
So when the interview is over and we're not live, I'll tell you what it originally was. But no, in this particular book, I was writing it a certain way. And when I reach a point where I feel like I don't know what the direction is, I have these pads of newsprint. The pages are like 2 feet by 3 feet. And I grab those and some markers and I just work out maps of different ideas until I get where I want to be. And that's what I did with this one. And it worked. Like the plot I had down, it worked fine. But I went to bed that night. I was like, yeah, turn the book in. I'm feeling good. And I woke up the next morning and went, oh shit. Because it was a much, much better book. And God bless my editor for trusting me and saying, okay, sure, go ahead, take it back.
I think what happens is you wrote the book for yourself and you weren't satisfied with the way you were telling that story for yourself. It would have probably worked fine for your readers, but you weren't happy with it. And we can't go in these books until we're happy with them.
Exactly. And luckily, unfortunately, one of the things that I don't love about my process is I write very, very well under pressure. And I write very fast under pressure. And so a lot of times, even if I have months and months and months, whatever I try to write early on, I end up going down avenues or meandering around or not liking what I've done or not being able to make decisions. When it comes right down to it, and I have a very tight deadline, I make very quick decisions and they're usually very good ones. Otherwise, I overthink it. Yeah. I've got to have that pressure. And I lament this on a regular basis to my agent. And I'm like, I'm really sorry. And every time she says, it's your process. And I'm like, could it not be? Because like, I would love it. But no, this is what this is what my process is. And
you can't change it. I mean, I've talked to, as you know, hundreds, if not thousands of writers, and everyone, I often wonder if it's the process. I could ask you both this. Is it the process that worked for your first book that, determines how it goes? I mean, sure, you can refine it and sure you can do other stuff, but I think writers are superstitious to some degree. If it worked, then maybe changing it would be a mistake. But are you saying that that's not the case?
No, for me, I took my first published novel was Silent in the Grave, and that one took 2 years to write. And now, I mean, I will bang out a draft in 6 weeks. And now I type very fast, which helps a lot because I am of the generation where we had to learn on IBM Selectric typewriters with blank keys, with the golf coach teaching you how to. God bless Coach Davis. That was the most useful class. Being able to type touch. Oh my God. Was just. Agree. Oh my God, it's the most useful thing in the world, right? Yeah. But my process just has changed in regard to the fact that I am much more efficient and I write much faster and I can do all the researching, all the plotting, all of the storyboarding, mood boarding, murder mapping I want to, but when it comes down to actually making those really crucial decisions, sometimes it is just down to the wire.
What about you, Jean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I will say that when I look back over it, I don't think any two books ever get written the same way. The differences are subtle sometimes, but I'm more inclined to try to work through the plot ahead of time now, the nuts and bolts of the plot. Whereas before I just relied on just figuring it out as I went along. So I'm more likely to have a plot in mind, but as soon as I start writing, it changes. And think like you changed your bad guy.
Mm.
That happens to me all the time. But I think that's also where we get the energy. So if there's stress in writing, as you say, I write under pressure too. I don't like it that way, but that's the way I do it. And I'm likely to just use the energy to get the book done. And that's it has to stay exciting for me or it isn't going to work. And I
I
guess
find that very vindicating, Jane. Thank you.
I think we're
That's
just,
very vindicating.
it may be a form of adrenaline junkie. I don't know.
It absolutely might be. But I know the book that I just turned in a couple of weeks ago, there is a section of it that did not exist until the morning I turned it in. Because I said, oh, I need this scene. And I wrote half of it the night before and half of it the morning it was due. It was like, all right, we're good to go, and sent it off. And, my agent and I've talked about that scene, and she said, what do you mean it didn't exist? And I said, it literally didn't exist. I wrote it that morning. And, but it was coming and it was just flowing and it was clicking. And when you don't have the time, you just don't second guess it. You just reach for, and it's there, and you're like, oh, I'm in the zone, and it's beautiful, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. But yeah, I think,
Let's
I'm
face it,
so glad to hear you say that your process is so similar, because I feel really vindicated
I
now.
think we're addicted. That's
I think that's what it is. Like, I don't like roller coasters, but this kind of buzz, yes, every day. I love it.
yeah.
Well, you both obviously have a very active subconscious that, is churning away while all this is going on. You couldn't create it out of absolutely nothing. So, inside you're processing stuff. And I wanted to talk about one thing, which I really love about this series. Because there were people who had lots of money and all free time, such as Lord Rossmore. Anyway, lots of aristocracy in England. They had the leisure and the funds to really explore science in a way, in the 18th and 19th centuries, particularly. The Renaissance was different, and Victorian era was the great industrialization era in Britain, but it also really interested people in the natural sciences, and people who could afford it or who could pay other people to do it, however it was. But it was all, in a way, it was really amateur. I've always found that so fascinating about the British, that they did so many things that were not entirely professional. They would form societies of people who were interested in this. And I think Lord Rossmore is a wonderful example of that. Well, and that Stoker and Veronica are an asset in that life that he wants to live.
Well, it grows out of, like you said earlier, you would have had aristocrats, starting off with their cabinets of curiosity, which was a piece of furniture, and then it was a room, and then it might be the entire wing of a house. And with the Rosemorans being, both wealthy and pack rats, they've amassed all of these different things, arms and armory and natural history specimens and coins and all sorts of things. But with the rise of industry in Britain, you've got a middle class for the first time that has like a thriving middle class that is a huge section of the population that has money to spend. They like to, kind of imitate the habits and interests of people who have been socially their superiors. And in the middle of the century, you've got Charles Darwin and, Alfred Russel Wallace and people like that, kind of positing all of these interesting theories that are coming out that are the focus of discussion. And you have people going out and bringing back all kinds of interesting specimens. And so the Victorians had, sometimes it would be a general interest in natural history, but then sometimes people would have really super specific micro interests, like ferns. Ferns were huge. Victorians loved their ferns. You'd have somebody who just collected different species of ferns, or somebody who was very into snails. And I find that absolutely fascinating that they would just geek out and say, yes, I am totally into, canaries. That's all I want to talk about are canaries, 17 different types of canaries. And that would be their thing. And that would be what they were known for. And yeah, there might be a canary society where they would kind of build their identity around it. They would have meetings, and then the organization would have a journal, and people would write articles, and you'd have lectures. And, I think before the advent of radio and TV and the internet, certainly you had, of course, the responsibility to entertain not only yourself but other people around you. That's what you did in the evening, is you talked about the things that interested you. And so if you're collecting coins or stamps or butterflies, whatever it might be, those are things you're going to share with other people. You're going to read up on them. You're going to attend talks, and that's how you amuse yourself, because you had an obligation to entertain other people when you got together socially. It wasn't just a matter of your own interest. It was, you were supposed to, kind of sing for your supper a little bit and provide convivial conversation. And it was, it was a point of honor if you were, kind of in the throes of one of these interests, to be able to bring someone into your home and say, this is my collection. What do you think? And so
yeah, it was travel too. I mean, I think you have
absolutely.
When was it Thomas Cook started his agency? Somewhere in the mid 19th century. I can't remember. But I was really shocked
Absolutely.
when it, came to an end recently, because it seemed like one of those institutions that should never die. But
Yeah, and again, that's an offshoot of the Grand Tour, which used to be just very wealthy, aristocratic young men. But then, the middle class has money. Women want to travel, so it expands, and you've got a lot more people going out, and especially too because for English people specifically, continental travel to other parts of the world, much less expensive than staying at home. And so you could go. That's why Agatha Christie had her debut in Cairo, because her mother could not afford to launch her into society staying in England. So they went and had a season in Egypt, where you had, because it was under British control at the time, you had a lot of young army officers, a lot of young diplomats. They could go, and for a fraction of the amount of money, she could launch Agatha into society, maybe get her married off, which ultimately didn't work. But it was a way of saving money, but still kind of putting themselves out there. Well, while they're there, they're seeing the pyramids, they're seeing sphinxes, they're buying all sorts of souvenirs to take home, and to show off. And probably there was a scarab beetle in there somewhere.
But what the two of you are describing presupposes a certain general level of education.
Right, literacy and publications, both printing and literacy.
Absolutely.
Also,
because Victorians loved nothing more than newspapers and magazines. They were periodical mad.
That means they had to learn to read.
Absolutely.
Not just at the elevated upper classes, but
yeah,
no, but I mean, everybody.
Right.
You had free public education. And so that's why you have the penny dreadful novels, is because you had people who could read them. You had newspapers that catered to every social class, every economic class, because people not only could read them, people wanted to read them. They demanded that.
And they not just read newspapers, they learned to read in the King James Bible. So
absolutely. And I don't know that we've ever had a group of people who wrote letters and journals and, kept more meticulous physical records than Victorians. My God, they wrote about everything. And that's part of what makes the research so much fun for the Veronica books, is because when Victorians traveled, they wrote about it. Yeah. They kept their journals. They wrote letters home. They came home and wrote talks and articles. And so they shared everything via the page. And because it's relatively recent, as far as history goes, it's endured. A lot of it has been digitized now, and you can just The minutes from the Houses of Parliament have been digitized. I can go in and search, okay, who had a telephone in 1988 or 1888 in London, because it was parliamentary debate. Should this person have a telephone? Should that person, do we embrace this new technology, or do we tell people, no, you're not going to have that? That's scary. And they chatted about it in Parliament. So, and those records are right there for anybody to go look up. It's phenomenal to have that kind of access.
Feel for the future historical novelist who will have a much harder time in many respects.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that just this morning. Like, you could go and look up correspondence between Charles Dickens and his publisher, between Emily Bronte and her publisher. You will never be able to look up correspondence between me and my editor, because it's all email. And when one of us goes, that'll all be deleted. None of it's going to be printed out and archived and saved. It's all just going to be ephemeral.
Yeah, I know one author who, in disposing of her estate, is actually leaving her laptop as part of it, on the theory that much of the research and, correspondence and everything else will be in the laptop. But of course, that also, presupposes that the cloud will survive and not be. I mean, there's so many
Exactly.
things. And the University of Iowa, I was really pleased to see, because I have wondered what in the world I ought to do with my filing cabinet full of all the letters and all, because when I started the store in 1989, we all wrote to each other. I have letters from P.D. James and Ellis Peters and I don't know what to, and anyway, they are starting an archive for bookstores, the history of bookstores.
Oh, wonderful.
I am so relieved, because I thought, I can just bundle all of this up and send it to someone to decide, how to sort it, how to label it, what to do with it and all, but it won't be lost, which it might very well be otherwise. And I was really excited about that. But then I thought, since we went digital, I don't really have those records anymore, of all the things we've done. Really.
No, and even if you were to print out an email, it's not the same, because if I had a letter from Jane, I would know what kind of paper she likes. I would know what her handwriting looks like. Did it look like she scribbled it in a hurry, or did she take her time with the whole thing? What does it smell like?
Right.
Does it smell like her perfume? Does she have a cat? What I would know a million things from having that paper artifact that originated with her, but then it passed through my hands. Does it smell like my perfume? Did I put a cup of tea on it and leave there are all these different things, these different little clues that you can pick up that are just not present. Even if you print out the digital that we have, you're missing so much context that I think we've lost. And I do feel sorry for the historians of the future, because I think we're not doing them any particular services.
You will love a comment. I need to call Ian up here before we totally get out of control, but you will love a comment that came up. Who were we talking to? Reese, I think it was, on Saturday. And anyway, AI came up and some other things, and a woman in the audience said that the way to defeat AI and many other things that might be is to write in cursive, that children should be taught cursive writing again. Because if you have, I love that. I thought to myself, my handwriting.
I love cursive. I was horrified to find out they're not doing it anymore.
No,
There's a reverse trend now. There's a reverse trend.
Yeah,
they're going back to it for two very good reasons. The first is that it's just faster.
It is. I mean, I know when I'm taking notes, it's so fast.
Yep. And that turns out to be a big asset for kids, because they move fast, and the printing, they hate that because it takes forever to just print out a whole sentence. So the speed factor catches up. And the other reason the instructor said was because it does work differently in the brain. It just is a different kind of writing. It's a different kind of learning.
It absolutely does. It forges a different neural pathway when you write something by hand versus putting it in on a keyboard or tapping it in. It is a completely different place. You remember it differently. I know that I am far likelier, and my father is in his 70s, and he laughs at me because he has all of his calendar digital. My planner, I have an old school planner that I use, and I write everything in it by hand because I'm much likelier to remember it if I've written it out by hand. And I color code it with markers. And I'm like, okay, I can picture my week. I've got 7 things that are all highlighted in blue. That means they're all work related. So, I mean, I know exactly what I'm doing because I've got that image, which is completely different. But if I were to tap it all into my phone, I would be lost. I would never remember anything.
I hear you. That's the reason I'm always writing to publishers when they say, here's your Net Gallery widget. And I write back and say, forget it. If I don't read it in an actual printed form, I won't remember any of it.
I always request when I'm asked to blurb or so, I always request a printed copy if they can possibly do it, because it's the same thing. I like to take notes on the manuscript. If I'm reading it to endorse it, I like to take notes as I go. I'll jot inside the front cover, oh, this is exciting, cracking pace or what, little phrases that will occur to me as I'm going. So by the time I finish the manuscript, I already have the beginnings of the blurb. I know what it felt like going through the book. And it seems like it would be so different if I were trying to do that, I've got to do this over here. Oh, I've got to annotate it with a keyboard. It feels like very different. Yeah.
Well, manuscripts, I always have to print out my manuscript a couple times along the way because I can't read it on the screen the same way.
I love the fact that we are actually looping back towards the Victorian age. Even in spies are going back to old school. I've had some wonderful discussions with spy novelists, because digital stuff can all be hacked and whatever it is. So
you can't hack a dead drop.
Yep. We're going back to some, I think that's really fun to see that loop kind of circling back. Ian, come and join us because it's almost 2:00. We've had such a good time here.
Hello,
Yes,
Ian.
indeed.
Ian is back.
Hello again, I'm back, and I've got some viewer questions for Deanna
Great.
and Jane.
Great.
Awesome.
To start with Deanna, one viewer says that they would love to see more of Sir Rupert and his wife. Any chance in this book?
Lavinia. Yes, I love those characters. I absolutely want to see a little bit more of them because I feel like especially Lavinia has got some interesting untapped potential there. I feel like she is just waiting to loosen her corset and get out in the world and get some adventures under her belt. So yeah, I think I would love to do more with them. I try not to put all of Stoker's brothers into a single book, and I try not to put them into every book because that's a lot of Templeton Vane energy. So I try to use that judiciously. So we'll have to find exactly the right project for Rupert and Lavinia. But yeah, I'd love to do that.
For both Jane and Deanna, where do you get most of your research material from? Internet, books, library?
Jane, you want to start?
Just everywhere. A lot of it is done on the internet nowadays, because there's so much out there. But I was a librarian, am a librarian. As Barbara can say, there's no such thing as an ex-librarian.
No, absolutely not. We live on.
Sort of like being in the Marines. So I'm very concerned with documenting the source, where the source of the research is. And that slows me down a bit because it's easy to find any answer you want on the internet, but backing it up with sourcing it and making sure it's coming from a reliable sources can be a little time consuming. But other than that, a lot of it's just coming out of my imagination, people. I write fictions.
Same. I've been researching Victoriana since I got out of college 35 years ago, something like that. So I've built up a pretty good library of my own. God bless librarians because they can get you anything you need from anywhere. The interlibrary loan is straight up magic. When I was writing the Dead Travel Fast, I needed a particular book about Transylvania that Bram Stoker had used. They ended up sending me the exact edition that Stoker had used. It was printed in the same batch as what Stoker. No one charged me for this. They handed it to me free. This book is 110 years old and I'm touching it. Got to use this exact research material that Bram Stoker used. It was absolutely mind-blowing. It was magic. I love when that happens. But yeah, there so much has been put on the internet. I've got my own library. I use the goodwill and skill of librarians because I love them. Yeah, it's all over the place. Wherever I can find a good fact, I will be a magpie and pop it in my nest.
Also for Deanna and Jane, will you both be going to Left Coast Crime?
I will not. What about you, Jane?
No, sadly. Ask Barbara.
Barbara?
I'm interviewing the guest of honor on Saturday, so I am
So
going.
Barbara will be there.
So that'll be really fun. I do, before I forget this, I did want to ask Deanna, I know that you're working, or your publicist has revealed that you're working on another Veronica, but you wrote a really fabulous different book last year. The name of which, because I'm old and forgetful, I can't recall, but you know what I mean, the spy
It's
book.
right down there. Killers of a Certain Age.
Thank you very much. So I understand that you are working on a similar book, same cast, different characters.
I turned in the sequel to Killers of a Certain Age 3 weeks ago. So I'm waiting for my editor's reading it now, and I will put the finishing touches on it, and it will go into production this summer, and it will pub next spring. And then after that will come Veronica 10. That one I have not written yet.
Very exciting news. I thought Killers of a
Yes.
Certain Age, even if I can't recall the title, was absolutely wonderful. So much.
Thank you. I loved writing that book, and I was so excited when I found out they were going to let me write another one.
I know.
So
I was
loved it.
too.
I loved it.
Having lobbied heavily
Thank you.
for it. No, but really, it's just a super book. We are constantly reordering it. It's
oh, thank you.
so much
Thank
fun
you.
to give it to readers. Anyway, that's good news for your fans. Ian, anything else?
Yes, one last question for both of you. How do you stay motivated to write?
Ooh.
Jane?
Can't stop. Addicted. I don't know, have any other explanation. I think if a writer can quit, they probably will quit.
Yeah, there's a wonderful quote in To Kill a Mockingbird where Scout talks about reading, and she said she doesn't love reading because one doesn't love breathing. Writing is the same. I can't imagine being able to quit because it is I'm a storyteller. This is what I do. And I think Jane absolutely nailed it. If you could quit, you would, because it is hard, but it's hard in really good ways. And I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else.
It's an obsession in a way.
Mm,
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
as a path towards aging, you absolutely can't beat it. So, good news for everybody, right? Reading is too. Reading and writing are both ways, keeping your brain engaged, exercising your brain is a
Good for
real.
your neuroplasticity.
That's right. No, it truly is. So I want to thank both authors for joining us today. I'm always sad when we don't see them here in person, but it doesn't always work that way. And thank goodness we actually have this tool called Zoom that we are still able to use. So
Yes.
Grave Robbery, thank you, Deanna. And Jane,
Thank
tell
you
us
so
again what
much.
your May book will be.
Sorry.
What is your May book?
People in Glass Houses. It's one of my Jane Castle futuristics.
Right. I know I just arranged to ship it to you, but I can't remember.
I don't blame you for losing track.
No, you're right. I mean, the volume of it, I don't know if you all have paid any attention to this, but every week I get a notice from Edelweiss, which is a publisher tool. And every week there is somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 new books being published. And every week there's at least 250, but more often 300 new adult fiction books being published. And, it's sort of like you say, how do you condense, overwriting? What is it that we are supposed to do in this flood? That's at least 1,000 new books a month. How is it that we are able to present those to you? How do we weed them out? How do we tell you which ones we think are really wonderful and worth your time? And this is how we do it in great part, is that we talk to you. the authors talk to you, I talk to you, we write to you, everybody writes, we have social media, the whole bit. There's so much noise out there. It's really becoming more and more complicated. But the good news is there are more paths to publication now than there have been for years. And, lots of new publication startups, lots of other things happening. So as readers, this is a time of astonishing productivity and astonishing choice. So the real question is, how do you navigate through it? So we thank you for watching and listening today, because this is one way you can actually go about it, right?
Yeah.
So thank you,
And
ladies.
huge thank you to the Poison Pen. You guys are wonderful. I absolutely adore this store, and in person next year.
I certainly hope so. Ian, would you turn us off so we can have a little more private conversation here? So thank you, everybody. Don't leave.